Hey guys, it's ZLR here, and today I'm going to be doing my Week 8 recap. And as you can tell, I'm wearing my Patriots hat, and honestly, haven't worn any Patriots stuff since our last win. And yeah, I I don't know why I don't wear this more often though. But anyway, let me just lower this a little bit because that glare on that's kind of fucked. But anyway, gonna talk about all these games here. And the first one we had was the Vikings and the Rams, with the Rams winning at 30 to 20. Um, we had Sam Darnold complete 18 passes out of 25 attempts for 240 yards and two touchdowns. Aaron Jones had 19 carries for 58 yards, and Sam Darnold had 3 carries for 6 yards. Justin Jefferson had 8 receptions for 115 yards. Aaron Jones had 2 receptions for 37 yards. We had Josh Oliver with 2 receptions, 30 yards, and a touchdown. We had Jordan Addison with 2 receptions for 22 yards, uh, Jalen Naylor with 2 receptions for 16 yards, Johnny Munt with 1 reception for 10 yards, as well as Trent Sherfield Sr., who had 10 yards off of 1 reception and a touchdown. Then we had Matthew Stafford with 25 completions out of 34 attempts for 279 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a interception. Kyren Williams had 23 carries for 97 yards. We had Blake Corum with 4 carries for 9 yards. Puka Nakua had 2 carries for 5 yards. And Matthew Stafford carried the ball 3 times but lost 4 yards because of it. Then we have Puka Nakua, 7 receptions, 106 yards. Cooper Kupp had 5 receptions, 51 yards, and a touchdown. What the hell's going on here? Sorry about that cut. My cat got a little bit caught up underneath the table I'm currently using. But anyway, we had Demarcus Robinson with 2 receptions for 35 yards and 2 touchdowns. Kyren Williams with 5 receptions, 19 yards, and a touchdown. Tutu Atwell with 1 reception for 18 yards, as well as Hunter Long. Uh, we had Colby Parkinson with 2 receptions for 17 yards. Blake Corum with 1 reception for 9 yards. And Tyler Johnson with 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Packers and the Jaguars, with the Packers winning 30 to 27. I just hope that Jordan Love is okay after he got his groin injury during that game. Uh, Honestly, sounds like it really fucking sucks. But anyway, we had Jordan Love complete 14 passes out of 22 attempts for 196 yards and a interception. Malik Willis had 4 completions out of 5 attempts for 56 yards and a touchdown. Uh, Josh Jacobs had 25 carries, 127 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Malik Willis had 4 carries for 23 yards. We had Chris Brooks with 4 carries for 16 yards. Emmanuel Wilson had 4 carries for 5 yards. Jaden Reed had a carry but didn't get anything out of it. And Jordan Love had a carry but got -1 yard from it. Then we had Tucker Kraft, 3 receptions, 78 yards, and a touchdown. Romeo Dobbs with 3 receptions for 72 yards. Jaden Reed with 2 receptions, 55 yards. We had Christian Watson with 4 receptions, 39 yards. Dontavian Wicks had 2 receptions for 11 yards. Uh, Chris Brooks had 1 reception for 1 yard. Uh, Emmanuel Wilson had 2 receptions but got -2 yards from it. And Josh Jacobs had 1 reception but got -2 yards from that as well. Then on the Jaguars side, we had Trevor Lawrence, 21 completions out of 32 attempts, 308 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. We had Tank Bigsby, 18 carries, 78 yards. Trevor Lawrence, 4 carries, 10 yards, and a touchdown. And Dearness Johnson with 1 carry for 3 yards. Brian Thomas Jr., 3 receptions, 60 yards, and a touchdown. We had Brenton Strange with 5 receptions, 59 yards. Christian Kirk had 2 receptions and 59 yards. I hope he's all right as well. I heard about his injury. Parker Washington had 3 receptions, 46 yards. Evan Ingram had 4 receptions, 36 yards, and a touchdown. Dearness Johnson had 1 reception for 20 yards, as well as Tim Jones. And Tank Bigsby had 2 receptions for 8 yards. Then we had the Cardinals and the Dolphins, with the Cardinals winning 28-27. We had Kyler Murray with 26 completions out of 36 attempts, 307 yards, and 2 touchdowns. James Conner had 20 carries, 53 yards, and a touchdown. Kyler Murray had 5 carries for 19 yards. And also Trey Benson had 1 carry for 10 yards. Trey McBride had 9 receptions for 124 yards. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 6 receptions, 111 yards, and a touchdown. Then we have Michael Wilson, 5 receptions, 31 yards, and a touchdown. James Conner has 2 receptions for 16 yards. Elijah Higgins had 2 receptions for 13 yards. Greg Dortch had 1 reception for 9 yards, and Zay Jones had 1 reception for 3 yards. And for the Dolphins side of things, we had Tua Tagovailoa with 28 completions out of 38 attempts, 234 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had Devon Achane with 10 carries, 97 yards. Raheem Mostert with 9 carries, 19 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Jalen Wright with 2 carries for 18 yards. Tua Tagovailoa with 3 carries for 13 yards. And Alec Ingold with 1 carry for 3 yards. Tyreek Hill had 6 receptions for 72 yards. Devon Achane had 6 receptions, 50 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen Waddle had 4 receptions, 45 yards. Jonnu Smith had 4 receptions for 20 yards. We had Alec Ingold with 3 receptions for 19 yards. We had Julian Hill with 3 receptions for 11 yards. Raheem Mostert with 1 reception for 11 yards. And Dwayne Eskridge with 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Jets and the Patriots, with the Patriots winning it 25-22. Thank God for that. And we had Aaron Rodgers, 17 completions out of 28 attempts, 233 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Breece Hall had 16 carries, 80 yards, and Braylon Allen had 12 carries, 32 yards, and a touchdown. We had Garrett Wilson with 5 receptions, 113 yards. Davante Adams with 4 receptions for 54 yards. Tyler Conklin with 3 receptions, 42 yards, and a touchdown. We had Jeremy Ruckert with 3 receptions, 14 yards. Breece Hall with 1 reception, 9 yards. And Xavier Gipson with 1 reception, 1 yard, and a touchdown. For the Patriots side of things, we had Jacoby Brissett, 15 completions out of 24 attempts, 132 yards. And Drake May with 3 completions out of 6 attempts for 23 yards. Ramondre Stevenson had 20 carries, 48 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Drake May had 3 carries, 46 yards, and a touchdown. Jacoby Brissett had 3 carries for 11 yards. And Antonio Gibson had 5 carries for 6 yards. We had Kayshon Boutte with 3 receptions, 46 yards. Hunter Henry with 5 receptions, 45 yards. Tyquan Thornton with 2 receptions, 20 yards. Ramondre Stevenson had 3 receptions for 17 yards. Austin Hooper had 3 receptions for 15 yards. Demario Douglas had 2 receptions for 12 yards. And I hope Drake May is okay after he suffered that concussion that he had. Then we had the Ravens and the Browns, with the Browns getting the win 29-24. We had Lamar Jackson, complete 23 passes out of 38 attempts, 289 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry had 11 carries, 73 yards, and a touchdown. Lamar Jackson had 8 carries for 46 yards, and Justice Hill had 2 carries for 5 yards. Zay Flowers had 7 receptions for 115 yards. Isaiah Likely had 4 receptions for 47 yards. Mark Andrews had 5 receptions, 36 yards, and a touchdown. Nelson Aguilar had 3 receptions for 36 yards and a touchdown. Rashad Bateman had 1 reception for 28 yards. Justice Hill had 1 reception for 14 yards. Charlie Kohler had 1 reception for 9 yards, and Derrick Henry had 1 reception for 4 yards. And for the Browns side of things, we had Jameis Winston, 27 completions out of 41 attempts, 334 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Nick Chubb had 16 carries for 52 yards. Donta Foreman had 5 carries for 26 yards, and Jameis Winston had 2 carries for 2 yards. Then we had Cedric Tillman with 7 receptions, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Elijah Moore with 8 receptions for 85 yards. Jerry Jeudy with 5 receptions for 79 yards. David Njoku with 5 receptions, 61 yards, and a touchdown. Then we had, I think that's Jeff Swaim with 1 reception, 7 yards. Pierre Strong Jr. with 1 reception for 3 yards. Then we had the Eagles and the Bengals, with the Eagles winning this one 37-17. We had Jalen Hurts, 16 completions out of 20 attempts, 236 yards, and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley had 22 carries for 108 yards. Jalen Hurts had 10 carries for 37 yards and 3 touchdowns. Kenneth Gainwell had 5 carries for 19 yards, and Will Shipley had 2 carries but got -3 yards because of it. Then we had Devonta Smith with 6 receptions, 85 yards, and a touchdown. A.J. Brown had 5 receptions for 84 yards. We had Grant Calcaterra with 3 receptions, 58 yards. Then we had Jack Stoll with 1 reception, 6 yards, and Saquon Barkley with 1 reception for 3 yards. For the Bengals side of things, we had Joe Burrow with 26 completions out of 37 attempts, 234 yards, and a touchdown, and 8 interception. We had Chase Brown with 12 carries, 32 yards, and a touchdown. Joe Burrow had 3 carries, 15 yards, and Zach Moss had 5 carries for 11 yards. Mike Gesicki had 7 receptions for 73 yards. Jamar Chase had 9 receptions, 54 yards, and a touchdown. We had Jermaine Burton with 1 reception for 41 yards. Eric All Jr., 2 receptions, 32 yards. Zach Moss with 4 receptions for 28 yards. We had Trenton Irwin with 1 reception for 4 yards, and Chase Brown with 2 receptions for 2 yards. Then we had the Colts and the Texans, with the Texans win this one 23-20. Anthony Richardson, 10 completions out of 32 attempts, 175 yards, a touchdown, and 8 interception. Jonathan Taylor had 20 carries, 105 yards, and a touchdown. Anthony Richardson had 6 carries for 45 yards, and Josh Downs had 0 carry, but 13 yards. Josh Downs had 4 receptions, 109 yards, and a touchdown. Michael Pittman Jr. had 1 reception for 16 yards. Trey Sermon had 1 reception for 14 yards. Jonathan Taylor had 1 reception for 12 yards. Alec Pierce had 1 reception for 11 yards. Adonai Mitchell had 1 reception for 9 yards. And Kylan Granson had 1 reception for 4 yards. That is a lot of 1 receptions. CJ Stroud, 25 completions out of 37 attempts, 285 yards, and a touchdown. Joe Mixon had 25 carries, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Dare Ungambale had 1 carry for 4 yards, as well as Damian Pierce. Stephon Diggs had 1 carry but had -4 yards, and CJ Stroud had 1 carry, -10 yards. Stephon Diggs had 5 receptions, 81 yards. Dalton Schultz had 4 receptions for 52 yards. Tank Dell had 4 receptions, 35 yards, and a touchdown. Joe Mixon had 4 receptions for 32 yards. John Mechie had 3 receptions for 29 yards. We had Cade Stover with 2 receptions for 19 yards. Xavier Hutchinson had 1 reception for 19 yards. And Robert Woods had 2 receptions for 18 yards. Then we had the Titans and the friggin' Lions, with the Lions win this one 52-14. Mason Rudolph had 22 completions out of 38 attempts, 266 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. Tony Pollard had 20 carries, 94 yards. Julius Chestnut had 7 carries for 32 yards. Mason Rudolph had 4 carries, 29 yards, and a touchdown. And Calvin Ridley had 1 carry for 3 yards. He also had 10 receptions for 143 yards. We had Nick Westbrook with 2 receptions, 39 yards, and a touchdown. We had Josh Weil with 2 receptions, 33 yards. Tony Pollard with 3 receptions for 23 yards. We had Tyler Boyd with 3 receptions, 14 yards. Chig Okonkwo with 2 receptions for 14 yards. And for the Lions side of things, we had Jared Goff, 12 completions out of 15 attempts, 85 yards, and 3 touchdowns. We also had Hendon Hooker, 2 completions out of 3 attempts for 6 yards. And David Montgomery, 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 3 yards and a touchdown. Jahmyr Gibbs, 11 carries, 127 yards, and a touchdown. David Montgomery with 9 carries, 33 yards, and a touchdown. We had Craig Reynolds with 3 carries for 3 yards, and Jared Goff with 1 carry for 1 yard. Sam Laporta, 6 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown. Khalif Raymond, 2 receptions, 14 yards, and a touchdown. We had Brock Wright with 1 reception, 8 yards, and a touchdown. Amon-Ra St. Brown with 2 receptions, 7 yards, and a touchdown. We had Isaiah Williams with 2 receptions, 6 yards. Jahmyr Gibbs, 1 reception for 6 yards. And David Montgomery with 1 reception for 5 yards. Then we had the Falcons and the Buccaneers, with the Falcons winning at 31-26. We had Kirk Cousins, 23 completions out of 29 attempts, 276 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Bijan Robinson had 13 carries, 63 yards. Tyler Algier had 12 carries for 33 yards. Ray McCloud had 1 carry for 17 yards, and Kirk Cousins had 3 carries for 16 yards. We had Kyle Pitts with 4 receptions, 91 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Darnell Mooney had 4 receptions, 86 yards, and a touchdown. We had Bijan Robinson with 7 receptions, 43 yards, and a touchdown. Drake London with 4 receptions, 34 yards. Charlie Warner with 1 reception, 13 yards. And Ray McCloud with 3 receptions for 9 yards. And for the Buccaneers side of things, we have Baker Mayfield, 37 completions out of 50 attempts, 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. We have Bucky Irving, 9 carries for 44 yards. We also had Rachaad White with 6 carries, 29 yards. We had Jalen McMillan with one carry for 17 yards. I almost said reception. Baker Mayfield had 3 carries for 11 yards. Sean Tucker had 2 carries for 3 yards. And Javier Thomas had 1 carry but had -2 yards from that. We had Cade Otton with 9 receptions, 81 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Raheem Jarrett with 3 receptions, 58 yards. Bucky Irving had 7 receptions for 40 yards. Rachaad White had 5 receptions, 38 yards, and a touchdown. Jalen McMillan had 4 receptions for 35 yards. Trey Palmer had 2 receptions for 29 yards. We have Ryan Miller with 3 receptions, 19 yards. Sterling Shepard with 3 receptions, 18 yards. And Sean Tucker with 1 reception for 12 yards. Then we had the Chargers and the Saints, with the Chargers winning at 26-8. We had Spencer Rattler with 12 completions out of 24 attempts for 156 yards. We had Jake Haener with 9 completions out of 17 attempts for 122 yards. And Taysom Hill with 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 3 yards. We had Alvin Kamara with 10 carries for 67 yards. Taysom Hill with 4 carries for 20 yards. We had Kendre Miller with 3 carries for 16 yards. We had Jake Haener with 2 carries for 10 yards. And Jamal Williams with 2 carries for 4 yards. We had Chris Olave, 8 receptions, 107 yards. Alvin Kamara, 6 receptions for 155 yards. We had Juwan Johnson with 3 receptions, 48 yards. Bub Means with 1 reception, 36 yards. Taysom Hill with 2 receptions for 21 yards. Mason Tipton with 2 receptions for 14 yards. And for the Chargers side of things, we had Justin Herbert, 20 completions out of 32 attempts, 279 yards, and 2 touchdowns. J.K. Dobbins had 17 carries, 57 yards, and a touchdown. Justin Herbert had 4 carries for 49 yards. Kamani Vidal had 6 carries for 16 yards. Hassan Haskins and J.K. Scott had 1 carry but got nothing out of it. Ladd McConkey had 6 receptions, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Joshua Palmer with 2 receptions for 72 yards. Will Dissly with 5 receptions for 41 yards. I also saw Jalen Reagor with 2 receptions, 35 yards. J.K. Dobbins with 4 receptions, 11 yards. And Scott Matlock with 1 reception for 9 yards. Then we had the Bills and the Seahawks, with the Bills winning at 31-10. We had Josh Allen, 24 completions out of 34 attempts, 283 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. We had James Cook with 17 carries, 111 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Ray Davis had 6 carries for 29 yards. Josh Allen had 7 carries for 25 yards. Khalil Shakir had 1 carry for 2 yards. And Mike Trubisky had 3 carries for -3 yards. Did anyone else just notice that? That was weird. Khalil Shakir, 9 receptions, 107 yards. Keon Coleman, 5 receptions, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Dawson Knox, 2 receptions for 50 yards. Dalton Kincaid, 4 receptions, 31 yards, and a touchdown. James Cook with 3 receptions, 22 yards. And Amari Cooper with 1 reception for 3 yards. Seahawks, Geno Smith, 21 completions on 29 attempts, 212 yards, and a interception. He also had 5 carries for 16 yards. Kenneth Walker had 9 carries for 12 yards. And Zach Charbonnet had 3 carries, 4 yards, and a touchdown. Jackson Smith had 6 receptions, 69 yards. Nice. AJ Barner had 2 receptions for 34 yards. Kenneth Walker had 4 receptions for 33 yards. Noah Fant had 3 receptions for 22 yards. Zach Charbonnet had 3 receptions for 20 yards. Jake Bobo had 1 reception for 15 yards. Laviska Shenault had 1 reception for 10 yards. And Tyler Lockett had 1 reception for 9 yards. And then we had the Bears and the Commanders, with the Commanders winning it 18-15. Caleb Williams had 10 completions out of 24 attempts, 131 yards. DeAndre Swift had 18 carries, 129 yards, and a touchdown. Caleb Williams had 10 carries for 41 yards. Rome Odunze had 2 carries for 13 yards. DJ Moore had 2 carries for 7 yards. And Rashawn Johnson had 2 carries, 6 yards, and a touchdown. Romo Dunze had 3 receptions for 41 yards. Keenan Allen had 2 receptions for 39 yards. DJ Moore had 2 receptions for 27 yards. Cole Kmet had 1 reception for 7 yards. We had DeAndre Carter with 1 reception for 7 yards, and Gerald Everett with 1 reception for 3 yards. And on the Commanders side of things, we had Jaden Daniels, 21 completions out of 38 attempts, 326 yards, and a touchdown. We had Brian Robinson with 16 carries for 65 yards, Jaden Daniels with 8 carries, 52 yards, Austin Eckler with 7 carries for 52 yards, and Jeremy McNichols had 1 carry but got -1 yard. Scary Terry had 5 receptions, 125 yards. Zach Ertz had 7 receptions for 77 yards. Noah Brown had 3 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown. We had John Bates with 1 reception for 20 yards. Brian Robinson with 1 reception for 11 yards. Luke McCaffrey with 1 reception for 8 yards. Austin Eckler with 2 receptions for 6 yards. And Dyami Brown with 1 reception for 6 yards. Then we had the Chiefs and the Raiders, with the Chiefs win at 27-20. We had Patrick Mahomes, 27 completions out of 38 attempts, 262 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a interception. Kareem Hunt had 21 carries, 59 yards, and a touchdown. Patrick Mahomes had 6 carries for 17 yards. And Carson Steele had 2 carries for 6 yards. Travis Kelce had 10 carries, 90 yards, and a touchdown. Xavier Worthy had 4 receptions, 37 yards, and a touchdown. We had Justin Watson with 3 receptions for 33 yards. Sam J. Pirine with 2 receptions, 30 yards. DeAndre Hopkins with 2 receptions, 29 yards. Noah Gray with 3 receptions for 23 yards. Mecole Hardman with 1 reception, 8 yards, as well as Carson Steele. And Kareem Hunt had 1 reception for 4 yards. For the Raiders side of things, we had Gardner Minshew with 24 completions out of 30 attempts, 209 yards, and 2 touchdowns. We had Alexander Mattison with 14 carries, 15 yards. We had Trey Tucker with 1 carry for 7 yards. Gardner Minshew with 2 carries for 6 yards. Hello, Cat. DJ Turner, 1 carry for 4 yards. Amir Abdullah, 1 carry for 2 yards. And Zamir White with 2 carries for -1 yard. This is how I'm gonna record the rest of the video. Brock Bowers, 5 receptions for 58 yards. Jacoby Myers with 6 receptions, 52 yards, and a touchdown. Okay, that one actually hurt. Stop. He likes to play. Jacoby Myers, 6 receptions, 52 yards. Alexander Mattison, 5 receptions, 29 yards. DJ Turner with 4 receptions, 28 yards, and a touchdown. Trey Tucker with 2 receptions for 26 yards. Amir Abdullah with 1 reception for 9 yards. And John Samuel Schenker with 1 reception for 7 yards. Then we had the Broncos and the Panthers, with the Broncos win at 28-14. We have Bryce Young, 24 completions out of 37 attempts for 224 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Johnny Hecker also attempted a pass but didn't get it. Chuba Hubbard, 15 carries, 56 yards. Miles Sanders had 1 carry for 7 yards. Jesus. Bryce Young, 3 carries for 6 yards, and Xavier Leggett, 1 carry but didn't get anything out of it. Why is this cat being so weird? Anyway, we had Jalen Coker with 4 receptions, 78 yards, and a touchdown. We had David Moore with 4 receptions, 39 yards. Miles Sanders with 7 receptions for 38 yards. Xavier Leggett with 4 receptions, 34 yards, and a touchdown. Chuba Hubbard with 2 receptions for 15 yards. We had Tommy Tremble with 2 receptions for 13 yards, and Jatavion Sanders with 1 reception for 7 yards. And for the Broncos side of things, we have Bo Nix, 28 completions out of 37 attempts, 284 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Cortland Sutton had 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 28 yards. And we also have Riley Dixon with 1 completion out of 1 attempt for 3 yards. We had Jaleel McLaughlin with 8 carries, 47 yards. We had Javonte Williams with 17 carries, 44 yards. Bo Nix had 5 carries, 4 yards, and a touchdown. We had Audric Estime with 1 carry for 4 yards. And Troy Franklin with 1 carry for 3 yards. Cortland Sutton had 8 receptions, 100 yards. We had Adam Trotman with 4 receptions, 85 yards, and a touchdown. We had Devon Vele with 3 receptions for 28 yards. We had Michael Burton with 1 reception for 28 yards. We had LeJordan Humphrey with 4 receptions for 22 yards, or as Brandon Perna likes to call him, Lil Hump. Lucas Kroll had 2 receptions, 18 yards. Jaleel McLaughlin with 1 reception, 9 yards, and a touchdown. We had Javonte Williams with 4 receptions for 8 yards. Marvin Mims had 1 reception for 8 yards. Troy Franklin had 1 reception for 6 yards. And Nate Adkins had 1 reception for 3 yards and a touchdown. How many people caught a ball? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11 different receivers. Jesus Christ. Then we had the Cowboys and the 49ers, with the 49ers winning 30-24. We had Dak Prescott, 25 completions out of 38 attempts, 243 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Ezekiel Elliott had 10 carries, 34 yards, and a touchdown. We also had Dalvin Cook with 6 carries for 12 yards. We had Kevontae Turpin with 1 carry for 11 yards. We had Hunter Luepke with 1 carry, didn't get anything out of it though. And Dak Prescott had a carry but got -1 yard from it. CeeDee Lamb had 13 receptions, 146 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Jalen Tolbert had 3 receptions for 44 yards. We had Jake Ferguson with 6 receptions for 23 yards. We had Kevontae Turpin with 1 reception for 16 yards. Dalvin Cook with 1 reception for 10 yards. Ezekiel Elliott had 1 reception for 4 yards. And for the 49ers side of things, we have Brock Purdy, 18 completions out of 26 attempts, 260 yards, and a touchdown. We had Isaac Guerendo with 14 carries, I think 85 yards, and a touchdown. Brock Purdy had 8 carries, 56 yards, and a touchdown. Ricky Pearsall had 1 carry for 39 yards. We had Jordan Mason with 6 carries for 18 yards. Deebo Samuel had 4 carries for 15 yards. We had Patrick Taylor with 2 carries for 9 yards, and Kyle Juszczyk with 1 carry for 1 yard. We had George Kittle, 6 receptions, 128 yards, and a touchdown. Deebo Samuel had 4 receptions for 71 yards. Ricky Pearsall had 4 carries for 38 yards. Isaac Guerendo had 3 carries for 17 yards. And Kyle Juszczyk had 1 carry for 6 yards. And last but not least, we had the Giants and the Steelers, with the Steelers winning at 26-18. We had Daniel Jones, 24 completions out of 38 attempts, 264 yards, and 8 interception. We had Tyrone Tracy Jr. with 20 carries, 145 yards, and a touchdown. Devin Singletary with 2 carries for 11 yards. And Daniel Jones with 3 carries for 1 yard. We had Darius Slayton with 4 receptions, 108 yards. Malik Neighbors with 7 receptions for 71 yards. We had Theo Johnson with 3 receptions, 35 yards. Wan'Dale Robinson with 5 receptions for 30 yards. Devin Singletary with 2 receptions for 12 yards. Tyrone Tracy Jr. with 2 receptions for 5 yards. Eric Gray with 1 reception for 3 yards. And for the Steelers side, we have Russell Wilson, 20 completions out of 28 attempts, 278 yards and a touchdown. Najee Harris had 19 carries, 114 yards. We had Jaylen Warren with 9 carries, 46 yards, and Russell Wilson with 3 carries for 7 yards. George Pickens had 4 receptions, 74 yards. Van Jefferson had 4 receptions for 62 yards. We had Calvin Austin with 3 receptions, 54 yards, and a touchdown. We had Darnell Washington with 1 reception for 29 yards. Pat Freiermuth with 2 receptions for 19 yards. Najee Harris had 3 receptions for 17 yards. Jaylen Warren had 2 receptions, 13 yards. And Michael Pruitt had 1 reception for 10 yards. And if I did miss any players in my recap here that I didn't mention, please let me know in the comments. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like, subscribe, comment, do really whatever you want to do. And as always, I'll see you all in the next one. See you around.